It was August 6, 2005 in Fortaleza, Brazil. Under the sunny, seemingly ordinary Saturday sky, the Banco Central was quiet. Its vaults held millions in cash, safely locked away in the heart of the bank. The building had all the markings of a secure facility: reinforced walls, high-tech security systems, and guards stationed around the clock. But in this case, none of these precautions would be enough. Beneath the city streets, 13 feet underground, an elaborate tunnel stretched nearly 250 feet, directly under the bank's vault. This wasn't a haphazardly dug passage. It was a meticulously constructed route lined with wooden support beams, ventilation fans, and even a lighting system. This tunnel was a masterpiece of planning, disguised as the work of a landscaping business. It had been dug slowly, in painstaking secrecy, by a group of robbers who had spent over 3 months preparing for this very moment. The heist had been executed with incredible precision. The robbers had rented a house just 2 blocks from the bank, posing as ordinary landscapers who worked day and night, quietly shipping soil and rocks away as they slowly burrowed toward their prize. It was as if they had engineered an underground miracle, moving closer to the vault day by day, driven by one thing only: the $70 million that lay waiting. Finally, they reached the vault wall, a 1.1-meter thick layer of reinforced concrete, built to be impenetrable. They faced the final challenge. Would their drills cut through? Would the noise give them away? Holding their breaths, they pressed on, watching each moment, each noise, each tremor. A few hours later, they were in. A single, small hole allowed them entry to the treasure. The following night, they crawled through, one by one, their hearts pounding as they faced their grand prize. Once inside, they stuffed 3.5 tons of Brazilian real bills into plastic bags. But here's where it got truly surreal. The robbers only took the unmarked bills, avoiding those whose serial numbers could later be traced. With eerie calm, they loaded the cash and crawled back into the tunnel, disappearing like phantoms into the earth. They left not a single clue, only the yawning hole where the vault's solid wall had once been. As Monday morning dawned and bank employees arrived, the vault's emptiness struck them first as an impossibility, then as a nightmare. Inside the Banco Central, shock spread like wildfire as stunned employees gaped at the cavernous emptiness where piles of cash once sat. Some blinked in disbelief. Others stumbled back, adrenaline pulsing through them. Police were called, and soon the vault was surrounded by investigators, security experts, and bewildered bank officials. The crime scene was surreal. Detectives examined the hole in the concrete floor, marveling at the audacity and skill required to carve through solid stone without anyone suspecting a thing. They followed the tunnel's path, descending into the narrow, dark passage, imagining the robbers' footsteps, inching closer and closer to their loot with each passing day. The house at the tunnel's end was soon discovered, yet what the investigators found there offered only more questions. The rented house was as tidy as any suburban residence. No traces of debris, no abandoned tools, and no fingerprints. It was as if the landscapers had vanished without a trace, leaving only the faintest scent of fresh earth behind them. Hours turned into days, and Brazil's finest detectives worked around the clock. They combed through the city's records, searching for any detail about the so-called landscaping business. Their first breakthrough came when they traced the lease of the house back to a man known as Antonio, who'd vanished along with the cash. Interviews with neighbors revealed that Antonio and his team kept to themselves, arriving at dawn and leaving after dark, all with a quiet, disciplined efficiency. The city buzzed with the news, and rumors spread like wildfire. Was Antonio an alias? Had the robbers fled the country with the cash? How could such a meticulously planned operation leave so little to trace? Every detail suggested a mastermind behind the heist, someone who had foreseen every possible risk, every avenue the police might pursue. As the investigation deepened, however, a second revelation emerged. The gang wasn't just clever. They were also ruthless. One of the crew members, feeling emboldened by the success, bragged about the operation to an acquaintance who happened to be under police scrutiny for unrelated charges. Within hours, law enforcement caught wind of this stray boast. With renewed determination, Investigators hunted down the source, a man named Jorge, who had a past marked by minor heists but nothing on this scale. Jorge was brought in, and detectives grilled him for hours. He played coy, offering nothing, a blank face refusing to give them even the hint of satisfaction. It was only after days of relentless pressure, surveillance, and the threat of severe sentencing that he finally slipped, letting one vital name escape his lips: Rafael. Rafael, as it turned out, was known to law enforcement. A shadowy figure in Brazil's criminal underworld, he was known for orchestrating complex heists and had connections that ran deep. He was the type who always stayed behind the scenes, known to his crew but almost invisible to authorities. The chase was on. The police staked out Rafael's known associates, monitoring their movements and tapping their phones. Tensions ran high as they knew Rafael was cautious. One false move and he'd disappear. But Rafael's next mistake was his boldest yet. Rafael, it seemed, couldn't resist the thrill of his success. Despite his reputation for staying hidden, he began moving money discreetly, funneling small sums through distant relatives and obscure businesses. But investigators were closing in, meticulously tracking each lead and mapping out his network. Every connection brought them closer, like strands in an intricate web, tightening with each day. Then, a break came in the form of a surveillance photo. Rafael had been seen meeting with a known associate at a small cafe on the outskirts of São Paulo. The police quickly set up a perimeter around his known safe houses and tapped into the phone lines of his closest contacts, hoping he would slip up again. Late one night, he did just that. Rafael placed a call, cryptic, guarded, but clear enough for seasoned detectives to interpret. He was arranging to meet a fence, a man who could launder the bulk of the money and help him stash it safely away. Law enforcement launched a full-scale operation, coordinating with local authorities to monitor the location without arousing suspicion. The police waited, nerves taut, tracking each move, and soon the two men appeared in the dim glow of a streetlight. The tension was electric as they exchanged a briefcase and whispered in hushed tones. The officers, positioned out of sight, watched and listened, waiting for the signal to move in. But Rafael was sharp, and he sensed something wasn't right. In a split-second decision, he bolted, and a chase exploded through the narrow streets, his footsteps echoing as he ran down alleys and back streets, his breath ragged. The police followed, lights flashing, the adrenaline blinding. Finally, cornered in a dead-end alley, Rafael stopped. The officers closed in, weapons drawn, ready to make the arrest. For a moment, he just stood there, defiant, with a hint of a smile. He didn't speak, didn't plead. He simply held his ground, knowing that, in some way, he had still won. His carefully hidden fortune remained untouched, hidden away, and his team scattered beyond the reach of the law. Rafael was taken into custody, but he never confessed to anything. The vault was never fully recovered, and despite his capture, whispers spread that some of the loot remained stashed, waiting to be unearthed. For years, locals whispered about the buried millions, wondering if one day they'd stumble upon it. The mystery lingered, the legend of the heist casting a long shadow, a testament to the perfect crime, executed with such precision and secrecy that, even in defeat, the masterminds left their mark on history. Months passed after Rafael's arrest, and although he stayed tight-lipped, detectives continued to pick at the threads he left behind. Rumors flew through Brazil's criminal underworld. Some claimed Rafael had managed to bury the money in secret locations across the country. Others believed he'd hidden it in offshore accounts, far out of reach of the authorities. His silence only intensified the allure, transforming him into an almost mythical figure. While Rafael's arrest closed one chapter, it didn't stop whispers from surfacing about the others involved. It was widely known that Rafael hadn't worked alone. His crew, an elite, hand-picked team, had practically vanished into thin air. Some were rumored to have fled to neighboring countries. Others might still be hiding in plain sight. Then, just when things had started to quiet down, a strange occurrence reignited the case. A remote cabin deep in the countryside was found abandoned, and inside, police discovered a cache of blueprints, maps, and tools. everything needed for tunneling. And there, under a loose floorboard, lay a single bundle of cash with a Banco Central seal. It was a taunt, a single clue left behind, as if to mock the police for their inability to solve the case completely. Analysts went over the documents meticulously, trying to decipher codes, routes, or any hints of a new location. Everything pointed to one of Raphael's close associates, a man known only as El Fantasma, the Ghost. The Ghost, as his name suggested, was impossible to track. He was the one responsible for the tunnel's design, the man who had drawn up the original plans. Authorities realized that capturing Raphael had been only one part of the puzzle. The true mastermind was still out there, moving in the shadows. And the Ghost, it seemed, had a plan of his own. Authorities intensified their search, pouring resources into identifying every alias, every possible hideout, and every connection to the crew. But each lead only deepened the mystery. They began to suspect that the Ghost might have even more elaborate schemes hidden from view, possibly planning another heist with the money he had already stolen. Then came a message. It was slipped to a police informant, written in code with only one line that read, "The job is never over." The tension rose as law enforcement realized they were up against an adversary who saw the world as a chessboard, each move carefully calculated, each piece meticulously placed. They were trapped in a game without rules, where every victory only hinted at something darker lying beneath the surface. Now, the chase for the Ghost had begun, a pursuit that would test not just the skills of law enforcement but also their resolve. As they ventured into the murky depths of Brazil's criminal underworld, determined to unmask the figure who had, so far, managed to stay one step ahead. The search for the Ghost, now the central figure in the investigation, took detectives deep into uncharted territory. Every lead they uncovered only seemed to reinforce his mythical status in Brazil's criminal underworld. He was elusive, silent, a master of evasion. Law enforcement had tracked the movements of criminals before, but none like the Ghost. He seemed to vanish and reappear with calculated precision, leaving traces only when he wanted to. The pressure on authorities was immense. Media coverage swirled around the heist's unsolved mysteries, stirring public fascination. People speculated about who the Ghost might be, with wild rumors spinning out about his background. Some said he was a former engineer turned outlaw, others swore he was ex-military, trained in the kind of tactics that allowed him to pull off such audacious schemes. But what no one could deny was his cold brilliance and methodical nature. As authorities continued the chase, they discovered something unusual. Old, unfinished tunnels under a derelict building on the outskirts of São Paulo. Dusty, with brick walls and wooden supports, the tunnels looked like they hadn't been used in years. Yet, upon closer inspection, detectives found faint signs of recent activity, footprints in the dirt, cigarette butts, and a handful of old banknotes bearing the Banco Central emblem. It was clear. Someone had been there recently, possibly preparing for something else, perhaps a new job. This discovery reignited a frenzy in law enforcement. Investigators combed through the tunnels, piecing together evidence of where the network might lead. They hypothesized that the Ghost had used these tunnels as a staging ground, a place to lay low and plan without being disturbed. Teams began mapping out every inch of the underground pathways, fearing it might be part of a much larger scheme that could extend far beyond Fortaleza. But just as they seemed to be closing in, a chilling message was sent directly to the lead investigator. It arrived in a simple, unmarked envelope left on his desk, bypassing security. Inside was a single, typed note: "You're playing in my shadows. Be careful or you may get lost." The investigator's heart raced. The Ghost had not only anticipated their moves, but seemed to be watching them closely, as if taunting them. They had underestimated him, it seemed, and he wanted them to know it. Rattled but more determined, the investigator doubled down on security, knowing that each step forward felt like venturing further into the Ghost's labyrinth. They deployed more agents, tapping into every resource to track down anyone who could be connected to him. They visited old contacts, tracked known associates, and watched every corner of the city, waiting for any sign of his whereabouts. Meanwhile, whispers grew in the criminal networks. The Ghost's old partners, fearing they were next, started to turn on each other, leaking information to the authorities in exchange for protection. Bit by bit, the detective assembled a portrait of the ghost's crew, loyal operatives who had grown increasingly paranoid. One night, an informant came forward with a startling revelation. He claimed that the ghost was preparing to vanish for good, cashing in on his remaining loot to retire somewhere far from Brazil's reach. But before he did, he had one last score planned, an audacious heist on another institution in a neighboring country, bigger than anything he'd pulled off before. The authorities realized that if they didn't catch him now, he'd likely escape forever, a shadow slipping into the night, leaving only rumors and stories in his wake. With mounting tension, the chase intensified. In the weeks that followed, the hunt for the ghost reached a fever pitch. The authorities felt the weight of time slipping through their fingers. They knew this was their last shot to capture him before he disappeared, taking his millions and his secrets with him. Every agent, every informant, and every lead was now dedicated solely to finding him. One evening, a break came in the form of an encrypted message intercepted by the task force. After hours of decryption, the message revealed a series of numbers and letters, coordinates perhaps, or a coded meeting point. The investigator's gut told him they were close. He could practically feel the ghost's presence. But he also knew the risk. This could be another trap, another play by a man who thrived in the shadows. As the team gathered around, piecing together the possible meaning of the code, a nervous silence filled the room. Finally, they pinpointed a location, an old, abandoned farmhouse deep in the Brazilian countryside, far from prying eyes. It was remote enough to be a perfect hideout, yet close enough to Fortaleza that the ghost could still operate under the radar. The investigator, along with a select group of his best agents, prepared for the raid. They traveled under the cover of night, each mile deepening the suspense, each turn in the road fueling the feeling that this was it, the showdown they'd been waiting for. The farmhouse was surrounded by thick brush and trees, the perfect place for an ambush or escape. They approached with caution, flashlights off, relying on the faint light of the moon as they moved closer. When they reached the farmhouse, it was eerily silent. The windows were dark, and the door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the breeze. They entered with weapons drawn, hearts pounding as they cleared each room. But the place was empty, filled only with dust and cobwebs, a carefully staged decoy. Just as they were about to leave, one agent noticed something strange. A small piece of paper pinned under a cracked floorboard in the corner. On it was a hand-drawn map of the city and a cryptic note. "Keep up the chase if you dare." The investigator gritted his teeth, realizing the ghost had anticipated their every move, and he wasn't done playing yet. The team's frustration mounted, but so did their resolve. They were now deep in a game of cat and mouse, one that the ghost seemed to enjoy far too much. But what the investigator didn't know was that the ghost had already set the next phase of his plan in motion. He was a step ahead, ready to leverage the city's underground networks, connections he had meticulously built over years. Rumors circulated that he had a network of safe houses scattered across the country, all set up for moments just like this. Days passed with little to no progress, and the pressure was mounting. The public, growing restless with anticipation, demanded answers, while the media painted the ghost as a dark legend who had outwitted Brazil's finest. But then, just as hope seemed to be slipping away, a new lead emerged, a close associate of the ghost. A man who had long served as his right hand and confidant had been arrested at the airport trying to flee the country. The interrogations were grueling, as the associate was as tight-lipped as the ghost himself. But after days of psychological pressure, he finally broke, revealing what he knew. The ghost had plans to leave the continent, and he had already booked passage on a ship leaving from the coast. The agent's heart raced. They had a chance, their last chance, to capture him before he vanished forever. In the dead of night, with backup teams spread across the harbor, they approached the docks where the ship was anchored. The investigators moved swiftly toward the ship, knowing this was their last chance to catch the ghost. Every exit was mapped, and the team was positioned to cut him off. The dock was eerily quiet, save for distant seagulls. On board, the ghost had set traps and decoys, But he hadn't counted on the team's precision. As they cleared each room, the tension built, closing in on him. Then, they spotted him on the lower deck, blending in with the crew. But when their eyes met, the ghost knew his game was over. In a last-ditch attempt, he ran for a side door, hoping to dive into the water. But the team anticipated the move and intercepted him. Surrounded, he had nowhere left to go. The mastermind behind the Banco Central heist, who had evaded capture for years, was finally caught. The long pursuit was over, and the news of his capture spread, marking the end of one of the world's most daring heists.